Hello and welcome to Nice J with JJ Smith. Thanks for listening. In this episode, we're going to take a deep dive into a story that I think has it all. It has everything. It touches sports, fame, culture, business, and marketing. And that's how Under Armour signed the best shooter in the game, in the history of the game. And somehow they missed a layup. While there's been a lot of shallow, quick, and very narrow focused reporting on this, I've not yet found a single source that has tied it all together and really told the whole story, let alone with an understanding of sports marketing that I'm going to bring to it. I watched and read probably 100 different references for this pod, so I'm going to save you a lot of time, but there's a lot to it. I'm going to point out some what I think are very interesting things that are related to this story, and I think it's a good one. So when we're done, you're going to know everything there is about this and be a little bit better informed and hopefully entertained along the way. But first, a word from our sponsor. Just kidding. We don't have one of those yet. Let's get right to what happened. Last week on November 13th, Steph Curry and Under Armour announced that they were breaking up, basically. They had a 13-year partnership, and that has come to an end. It was a little bit of a surprise. It took a lot of people by surprise. Under Armour has had their issues, but this sort of came out of the blue. And the next night, fans that went to the shoot-around for the Warriors-Spurs game noticed that Curry was warming up in his pregame shoot-around in something other than his signature shoe or Under Armour shoe. That was the first time in over a decade that has happened. And, sneakerheads, he was wearing a pair of Nike Kobe 6 Proto Mambasitas, black and white. And while he did play in his signature UA shoes in the game, the statement had already been made before it started, before tip-off. He was officially a sneaker free agent. And in the sports world, this is a big deal. The most marketable player in the league, now no longer under his contract. So a big deal. A lot of people speculating about it. But let me give you a little bit of the background so you have all the information you need. Kevin Plank, he is the founder and CEO of Under Armour. We'll talk about him a little bit later on. He had this to say. For Under Armour, this moment is about discipline and focus on the core Under Armour brand during a critical stage of our turnaround. That is a whole lot of corporate speak that says absolutely nothing. It always comes down to money, and that's what we'll learn a little bit about this later. The partnership lasted 12 to 13 years. Curry brand will become an independent entity. Curry retains control over the branding and the product line. He just has to have new retail or manufacturing partners to make that happen. This also extends beyond basketball. The Curry brand, if you're not a golfer, you don't know, but Curry's actually a pretty great amateur golfer and has a golf line under his brand as well that I think does pretty decent. Under Armour will still release a last and final Curry shoe, the Curry 13. That should come around spring of next year, and that'll bring the typical colorways and related apparel. So that's still going to happen. It's a little bit of a lukewarm launch. Like, how much money are they going to put behind it? Like, that never goes well. And the important thing to know is Under Armour is in the middle of a big restructuring. They'll call it a turnaround, but it's a restructuring. And they have, on their books, $95 million in restructuring charges and a total of $255 million in related costs as their financial reports. And we'll mention this again later, but their stock has fallen more than, somewhere between 40 and 50% over the past year. Ouch. They say the company says that the split will not significantly affect profitability. This is the story within the story, right? Even though Curry-related revenue is still expected to be around $100 million this fiscal year, but their global basketball revenue between 100 and 120 million. But for me, admitting this is admitting what the failure is all about. The fact that it's only valued at that is not great. So let's go back in time. Let's tie Curry's career and the Under Armour brand and the Curry shoes kind of together. So we'll give you a little bit of backstory. Obviously, everybody knows who Curry is, but there's some details here that I think are important. He was selected as the 7th overall pick in the 2009 draft. So starts in 2009. Obviously, he played at Davidson in college. Interesting enough, the 6 players picked before Curry in that draft. Blake Griffin had a great career, no problem. Hasheem Thabeet, second, not a great career. Currently playing in the Tanzanian Professional League for Dar City. So, he's made a career. God bless him. James Harden picked third, pretty good. Tyreek Evans, he had a decent career with the Pacers, Pelicans. I think he's last played in Mexico. He was picked fourth. Probably wouldn't go that high if we redrafted. Ricky Rubio, who had a solid career before the NBA, and certainly for Spain, I think they won a gold medal in the World Championships in 2019, 2020, somewhere in there. Played for the Suns, had a good career, had some injuries that he fought over, but solid pick there. You couldn't argue too much about that. Would have had an even better career without the injuries, I think. Johnny Flynn right before Curry. I don't think you can explain that. And then Curry at 7th. So he's chosen by Golden State Warriors. And in that draft, which everyone panned as being one of the weakest drafts ever, the later rounds would see Patrick Beverley, DeMar DeRozan, and Drew Holiday. So in retrospect, with Stephen Curry in there, he was part of a really great draft. That's a top 10, maybe even a top 5 draft of all time in the NBA. That's really, really significant. He played collegiately at Davidson. Like I said, he was named Conference Player of the Year. He set the NCAA single season record for 3-pointers made. He led the NCAA Division I in scoring in his junior year. And that's why he was picked in that Mitch. I think the reason he didn't go higher is probably size and weight. Wasn't sure what that was going, but he has an NBA pedigree. Obviously, his dad played in the NBA for Charlotte and Toronto and a couple other teams too. But early in his career, it wasn't like obviously he's going to set the league on fire. I mean, he had a lot of ankle issues and injuries, and became sort of an underrated player under the radar for a while in the Bay Area before becoming arguably the best shooter in the league. So you'd go to those early 2010, 2011 Warriors games. Like, he was fun to watch then too, but it wasn't what it is now. By 2013, he was not a huge star, but definitely one of the players on the edge. And in that time, he played in Nike shoes for the first 4 years of his NBA career. He had worn Nike Zooms and some other brands, but he was a Nike athlete. So obviously he was pretty popular, but he didn't have a signature shoe. He wasn't the focus of Nike's branding. He was sort of on the roster. So in October 2013, he signed with Under Armour. And 2 years later, he, as a brand ambassador, and 2 years later, he got his first signature shoe line in 2015. We'll talk about that timing. One big interesting thing is, how did Nike lose this? They had this athlete who was going to become, and no one knew this, of course, but who's going to become one of the greatest players of all time, and certainly one of the most charismatic, and certainly the best shooter. So Nike lost Stephen Curry due to basically a bad PowerPoint and presentation. There was a lack of perceived value and some other things, but this failed presentation kind of had a little bit of everything. During the pitch meeting, Nike reps would repeatedly mispronounce his name, which I do all the time. They call him Stefan, and this is to Del Curry, his dad, who was kind of part of the team, of course, which makes sense because he was an NBA player. So, Stefan, not Stefan. There were errors in the slides, so a PowerPoint slide was mistakenly left with KD's name on it. So, clearly they're using a template or slides from a Kevin Durant presentation to Curry. That's never good. And even the location for the meeting took place at a Marriott instead of like Nike HQ, which would have been a lot better. So there was this like feeling of, kind of quickly arranged, low priority, sloppy presentation. In retrospect, the Curry team basically said there was a lack of perceived value, no signature shoe. They said it was an undervalued contract. I've read, in a couple places that Nike eventually proposed something very similar to undervalue in terms of basically this $4 million annual contract, but at least initially it felt like it was not that high. And then, of course, a lack of a signature shoe and the focus. Nike, would have been spreading their love across a lot of athletes, and Curry, I think, wanted a little bit more. Under Armour offered, greater attention, more focus, and a little bit more autonomy, giving Curry the chance to design his own shoes and eventually give him a significant role in his own brand. Of course, nobody knew that at the time, but that was sort of what he saw. One of the very, I think, kind of funny and sad or interesting humanity parts of all this, and that's Nico Harrison. So if you've been paying attention to the NBA headlines over the last year, we have to mention his name because he'll be forever remembered as the guy who traded Luka Doncic from the Mavs to the Lakers. Admittedly, there were a lot of Mavs personnel that had to sign off on that. The owner, for sure. Jason Kidd, the coach, definitely. And probably a few, a lot more. But Nico's taking the blame forever on this, whether fair or not. Why is this relevant? Well, in 2013, Nico Harrison was the vice president of North American basketball operations for Nike. His position was responsible for managing Nike's basketball division in the region and working with its star players. That's LeBron, Kobe, and you guessed it, Steph. While not alone in this either, Harrison was tasked with re-signing Stephen Curry and responsible for the gaffes in the presentation. While not maybe personally had made them, he was the guy. So that's not great. Those are not two great things to have on your resume. Though I'm sure a lot of us would love to have the career that Nico Harrison has had and his successes. And while he hasn't, we haven't heard what he's going to do post the firing in Dallas, I'm sure he'll be fine. So anyway, that's how Nike lost it. How did Under Armour win this? And for me, it's not just a story about losing. There was a clever strategy that I don't think has been mentioned or talked enough about. It's serious marketing guerrilla warfare. It's genius. So when Under Armour was first trying to reach Steph Curry, I think they copied a little bit of what Nike may have done when they got Adidas or Michael Jordan away from Adidas. Nike sort of infiltrated his inner circle. If you watch the Air movie, I think there's a little bit about that. They kind of reached out directly to the group of influencers around Jordan, his parents in this case, and they kind of convinced them to take a meeting. So they kind of went that indirect route. But to get Steph Curry, Under Armour did something really genius. And no one's really presented it this way, but they signed Kent Bazemore to a contract, and having him get sort of this royal treatment for Under Armour. Now, who's Kent Bazemore? He was a rookie in about, I think, 2012 on the Warriors. He was a player from Old Dominion, obviously decent player, but not a significant NBA player, or certainly a significant NBA star even as a rookie. But he signed a contract with Under Armour, and he would get more gear and more shoe boxes and more love in front of his locker than anyone else. And Curry's even said this in a video interview. Bazemore was a huge reason I made the switch. He's the biggest spokesperson of this brand. So Kent Bazemore, an relatively insignificant NBA player, was instrumental in Under Armour signing Stephen Curry as sort of this proxy. So they signed Bazemore, he had his locker next to Curry, and they provided him with this visual support that Curry noticed and would ask about. So they basically used his rookie teammate as an indirect recruiter. They signed Bazemore, shocked and on him with a bunch of stuff, and Curry saw this brand was serious about basketball. That's crazy. They basically had a mole. They signed someone else to sign Steph Curry. That is genius. It's so good. It's so good. It's so smart. So smart. It's a marketing campaign for an audience of one. Really, really well done. And then, of course, they had to pitch him, right? So once they got his attention, they pitched him ambitiously. There were concerns over his susceptibility to ankle injuries, and no one knew he was going to become the greatest shooter ever. But they got Curry kind of at the right point. He was still relatively affordable. They were taking a bet on him. He was taking a bet on them. It was like this mutually beneficial bet on each other. And basically, Curry ended up leaving Nike's deal for roughly the same amount of money, but it was more about this like upside, this opportunity, more than the financial bottom line. Curry saw himself as the face of something. He wanted to be the face of something, rightfully so, and not just another athlete. But the fact that Under Armour was smart and kind of did this guerrilla warfare from a marketing standpoint is just awesome. So Under Armour was crafty and smart, but they also had impeccable timing. In 2015, during the NBA All-Star Game, the Curry Ones were launched. They had a Jamie Foxx-led campaign that announced Curry as the fresh-faced assassin. While interesting and successful, we can kind of come back to this as it sort of foretells something about the marketing failures to come. But the launch in Curry's career was about to make history together. That timing was impeccable. In that year, Curry won his first league MVP and led the Warriors to their first championship since 1975. He was wearing Under Armour Curry Ones into the finals. You don't get any better than that. The following season, Curry became the first player to be unanimous MVP and led the league in scoring. And he shot, I think his splits were like 50, 40, 90, which is insane. That's field goal percentage, 3 percentage, and free throws. That same year, the Warriors broke the record for most wins in a regular season. They got to the finals in 2016, though they did squander a 3-1 series lead to the Cavs. We don't have to talk about that. Curry then helped the Warriors win back-to-back titles in 17 and 18 and reached the 2019 NBA Finals. And they're just a juggernaut at this point. But that year, they fell to the Raptors in 6 games, and really the reason was Durant got hurt. Not once, but twice. Once in the finals itself. So these, 4 years were like peak Curry, and Under Armour was with him, right? By 2020 and the launch of the Curry brand as a separate entity under Armour, it's hard to say, under Armour, Forbes estimated that Curry could be worth as much as $14 billion to the company with him as the lead professional. The initial launch of his shoe helped give Under Armour a stronghold in the market. Like, they disrupted everything. I mean, Nike was, I'm sure, in their offices, a little bit afraid of what they were doing. When the Curry brand launched in 2020, the two groups hoped it would kind of be the partnership that propelled those products into new spaces, which it did in golf and lifestyle. And they marketed that agreement, they cemented that agreement in 2023, 3 years later, with a long-term contract extension that they called a lifetime deal. So as recently as 2023, they were looking at this as like a forever deal. Initially, when the Currys came out, they started to take some market share, but we'll talk about that next, right? Because the shoes must be selling, right? Like, they have to be. If you want to be universally frustrated, I suggest trying to look up signature shoe sales. It is almost impossible to find a reliable source for any information, and you have to piece together vague and far too broad corporate financials to extrapolate a guess. But, and you're going to have to trust me a little bit on this, I think I have a good sense of where things were and are currently in regards to Curry shoes versus the other dominant players. Basically, Curry did have one of the strongest launches ever for a signature shoe line. He helped Under Armour's footwear revenue to a record quarter in 2015, and in 2016 they were projected to do over $160 million, and more importantly, outperform LeBron for the active player with the best-selling signature sneaker. That would also outpace KD, Kyrie, and Kobe in their Nikes in that particular projection. So Nike, I think initially were definitely a little bit afraid of things, Adidas probably as well, but Nike and Jordan never lost the war, even when Curry briefly won this little fight. Jordan brand was doing billions annually. LeBron's line alone had several years at $300 million plus over the course of the last 10 years. Nike controlled roughly 3/4 of the performance basketball and a huge majority of like retros and lifestyles. By 2017, 2018, Nike's lineup, so LeBron, Kyrie, KD, later Giannis, Tatum, and Jordan retros, of course, they had kind of they still had all the buzz on for sneakerheads on all those platforms and resale value, etc. And even Adidas and Puma, they had signature players like Harden, Lillard, LaMelo. Halliburton's a good example now. They had, interesting niches, but never really hit Curry's projected peak at 2016. From 2019 on, the real story is less about Curry versus LeBron and more about like these performance shoes versus lifestyle and kind of retro and fashion drops. More recently, say for the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen the revival of Kobe's, the rise in popularity of Nike's Sabrina line, which is pretty awesome. Trust me, I see a lot of Sabrinas on the court of boys' youth basketball teams. You never thought that would be possible 10 years ago. And don't get me started on the book ones, all the colorways, the fun designs that he puts out. And of course, the book 2's just launched, so we might have to do a separate pod on all that. The other big angle here is Under Armour's trouble. I don't want to make this into like a financial Wall Street podcast, but basically, declining business, weak demand, a lot of financial pressure. So Under Armour had several years of declining sales, particularly in the basketball segment, despite having the most marketable player in the league. And the announcement came as part of a larger restructuring. Their projections for fiscal year 2026, Under Armour estimates its global basketball revenue, including the Curry brand, to be only at 100 to 120 million. Ouch. For perspective, that is a small slice of Under Armour's total business, right? So obviously less important than some of the stuff that's making them real money. And then in contrast, Nike's Jordan brand brought in 7.6 billion in 2025. Even though that represented a 16% drop. So the category's down. Under Armour is a sliver of what they need to be. And in 2025, with the Curry portfolio, an estimated 2% of their total revenue for the brand, and down at least 50% from its peak, you can see why they might want to restructure and figure out that contract. I would say they took the wrong direction. I think you double down on that contract and make good on it. But maybe Curry wasn't willing to do that either, because Curry's 2023 deal included a lot of stock, 8.8 million common shares reportedly, and that would be worth somewhere around 75 million when he signed, along with other performance-related incentives. But by now, that value has dropped in half, and reportedly Curry walked away from that to keep control of his brand. I'm not 100% sure if that's the case. If he left those stock options on the table, you'd have to get into that contract. I'm not sure anybody knows. But I'd say that his brand is worth way more than 40 million in the right hands. So I think he did the right thing. And the other takeaway is Curry's at the tail end of his career. And while a big NBA star, that's not the same thing as someone in their prime. That changes the equation a little bit. You have this young star building worldwide, following, and now it's maybe more of a legacy brand, and you want to transition to that sort of Jordan model. I still think there's a lot of potential there, but Under Armour may have recognized that their window to leverage him was either narrowing or over, and I think they may have recognized their failure to do with it what they needed to when it was easier to do it. So Curry said, Under Armour believed in me early in my career and gave me the space to build something much bigger and more impactful than a shoe. I would say that is him expressing what he hoped they would do more than what they actually did. But he says, I'll be forever grateful. That, of course, he's a class act, And then, this is kind of like a mutual announcement, it seemed like. So they did handle that pretty well. The CEO of Under Armour, again, that's Kevin Plank, said this lets two strong teams do what they do best. Under Armour is focused on product innovation and performance for athletes at every level. So I think that just means less superstars, more high school. That's what I think, which is, the heart of what they did, high school football. Curry brand gets independence to determine its own future. That's good for Stefan and good for Under Armour. Here's my take. This is bananas. It's bananas. You partnered up with Stephen Curry, the player who could change the game more than anyone, maybe even more than MJ, right before he became red hot and launched a pretty solid product with even luckier timing. And while MJ and Curry are different, Curry is clearly a peer in terms of marketability and likability. I would argue even more so. I don't have a Q celebrity score. I think you have to pay to get that, but it's got to be very high. The last public N score, which is Nielsen's alternative to a Q score, their snapshots place Curry in the high 80s to low 90s, which is elite. For reference, Tom Brady at his peak 75, Messi at his peak 84. So Curry is the guy. While you had a little bit of success at launch, you failed to leverage the best possible athlete to have in today's world, much better than LeBron, and you did that into something less than $100 million in sales 10 years later. From my perspective, this is a colossal and historic failure on a few different levels. First, this is a failure of marketing. Now, the media landscape is admittedly different, but I can remember at least 10 different Air Jordan spots and campaigns like they were yesterday. Of course, the platforms are different and the audiences are more divided now, but Nike did work for Jordan that stood out and matched his personality. Not asking too much of him early on and later taking advantage of his increasing savvy and comfort pitching. Off the top of my head, I made this list. The band in the NBA spot.
On September 15th, Nike created a revolutionary new basketball shoe. On October 18th, the NBA threw them out of the game. Fortunately, the NBA can't stop you from wearing them. Air Jordans from Nike.
Take flight. The 100-foot hoop, he jumps up, kind of hangs there. Of course, Mars Blacksman's got to be the shoes.
Right?
Nah.
Is it the short socks?
No, Mars.
Money's gotta be the shoes. Shoes? Shoes. Shoes. You sure it's not the shoes?
I'm sure, Mars.
What about the shoes?
No, Mars.
Money's gotta be the shoes.
The failure spot.
I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed.
The epic truth that was Frozen Moments, which is like the slow motion capture of fans watching MJ in slow motion as he defies gravity. I think it was against the Lakers, or, made to look like it was against the Lakers. And even the much more recent Let Your Game Speak, I mean, that one gives me chills. It's like all the youth players kind of recreating the best moments of MJ's career on the court. No words to that spot, just you get it instantly. None of these spots delve into the technology behind the shoes or the material or the cushioning or the science. It just came down to if they were good enough for Mike and they were cool, we'd be clamoring for them. It's unfair to compare Curry to Jordan in some ways, but I don't know. In a lot of ways, Curry has a lot more appeal to kids, women, and people who don't like aggressively competitive jerks. Jordan was, by all accounts, single-minded about winning. He was, to pardon the word, an ass a lot of times. But that's marketable in one way. But Curry is something else entirely. Off the court. And then on the court, he's just as much of a killer as Michael was. He just smiles and shimmies a little bit. Now, as a kid, I bought my own basketball shoes with money I made working on farms, baling hay, or milking cows, or walking fences after I had done those things at my family farm for free. So I only had one pair of Air Jordans until I was in my 40s. I bought them when I was in high school, the Air Jordan 7s. But of course, when I bought them, the 8s had already come out, and these were off-season and on sale. I did not care. I was really happy to have them. I wasn't even a big Jordan fan. I actually rooted against them. I was a Sonics fan and loved Sean Kemp and Gary Payton. I would have bought Sean Kemp shoes. They just didn't. They were these big, oafy shoes for bigs, and I needed something a little bit more speedy. Under Armour started out as an apparel company. I remember them for the football, protect this house, and those tight shirts, and football, right? They just had this like uber masculine football kind of energy, and they're an apparel company.
We must protect this house. Will you protect this house? I will. Armour.
The Curry marketing beyond the initial launch of the Curry 1 started to feel like they were reverting back to that kind of retail messaging. They seemed to forget who they had and why people buy basketball shoes in the first place. I mean, sure, some people play basketball in basketball shoes, but a whole lot more people will wear them to work or to school or on a date if they're cool. And Under Armour never really cracked the code on cool. And this is the job of a marketing agency. The closest they came was probably Change the Game for Good, the campaign when the Curry brand was launched in 2020. But even now, that messaging still feels too narrow for a star like Curry. They can never define the game as something more than merely basketball. It never changed culture, and that is a shame. I run an ad agency, and if you want to get real insider baseball, one of the problems is Under Armour wasn't using a good enough agency. Nike and Jordan had Wieden and Kennedy, and they're the best agency in the world for my money, and a penchant for breaking the rules and having the touch and taste and perspective and their fingerprint on culture. Under Armour used a roster of agencies who, I'm not pointing fingers, but they clearly weren't up to the task. Steph is the perfect athlete for the TikTok, Reddit, House of Highlights, YouTube Shorts generation. Everything he does, from his warm-up routines to his in-game shimmies to those long-distance bombs, he is the content and the message at once, and is a better combo than, Dude Perfect and Mr. Beast and That's Amazing, all wrapped up into a fun-loving, kind of handsome, normal-sized human being that you could relate to. Warriors games were events, and you couldn't miss them. I think some of the best marketing that's been done around Curry is what the Warriors did themselves. They had a theme called Joy in Buckets, and it was like this really kind of smiley basketball. That personality, I think, was the closest to capturing what it was like to be around Curry, and I think they could have done something really great with that too. But that was just the team's in-house marketing for the season, right? Under Armour should have done better than that. I started dating my wife in 2014. I should know that date. 13, 14, somewhere in there. Anyway, somewhere in there. And she was never, she isn't a big sports fan. She hates the NFL, ignores baseball, and just not into those team sports beyond soccer. But I watched the playoffs in 2015, and she started to get into this Steph Curry guy and learned about Clay, the Splash Brothers, and the whole thing. She started to hate LeBron as much as I did. And again, that's sports hate. I think LeBron is great, so don't come at me. And now she still won't miss very many Warriors games, and is the reason we have League Pass. That is the power of Steph Curry on his own. But this is also a failure of product, where the Curry ones were spicy a little bit, and the launch was decent. Subsequent versions of the shoes left a lot to be desired. Nick Engvall, a sneaker industry insider who's worked at or with many of the brands, including Under Armour at several points, he recently posted an article on the failure from a product perspective on the sneaker newsletter Substack. It's dead on. He called it the biggest failure in a century of sneakers. But I might call it one of the biggest business failures in recent times. This is what he said, though. Its early design philosophy, this is Under Armour, was reminiscent of those wild early 2000s And One shoes. I believe the company actually had designers from And One on the team. Those chunky, strap-heavy designs that seemed outlandish then, they'd be absolutely perfect for today's Y2K-obsessed sneaker culture. The irony is painful. Under Armour was accidentally ahead of its time, then lost its nerve, and tried to play it safe. I think he hit that right on the head. There were a few highlights over the years. My son actually wanted a pair of Curry's designed for the girls when he came out with those. They were pink and had flowers on them. I think he may have worn them with a bit of irony, but I'm unsure about that. I think he thought they were cool. But there were very, very few big brand moments, if any, except for bad ones. Of course, everyone knows about the Curry Too Low Chef shoes from 2016. This is just a couple years into their agreement, right? They were called the Chef Curry disasters. These shoes were so bad, I'm not even sure the brand ever recovered, to be honest. I'm not even sure if this was an attempt to be so uncool they were cool, but these shoes were roasted online. A couple tweets. I'll read them to you. Under Armour really targeting that emergency room nurse demographic. The new Curry 2s are great for guys who used to wear New Balance, but were still having a little too much sex. They are the I work at the Cheesecake Factory 7s. Do the new Steph Curry at Under Armour shoes come with a pack of Werther's hard candies? Yes, officer, right here. I saw everything. 7s. It's important to note these shoes apparently sold out, so they didn't fail per se, but people often miss the opportunity cost of another better pair and the damage that a bad product can do long term. And the craziest part of the shoe's history, Curry couldn't wear them in the finals, or at least was advised not to and didn't by the team, his agent and his manager, because they were too low for a low top. This is both a marketing and product failure all in one. But lastly, and mostly, this is a failure of imagination. Curry is this generation's change agent. When young players pretend to be someone in the driveway, it's Curry. It's not LeBron. It's not KD. It's not Jokic. It's not even Doncic. He has changed the game and led one of the most fun teams to watch in history. He's the greatest shooter ever. So good, we have to warn kids to not just come out and shoot threes during every practice and youth basketball. And as Engvall said in his article, his cultural impact transcended sports. Everyone from your nephew to your grandmother knows who Steph Curry is. Yet somehow, Under Armour managed to make him uncool. Yeah. I think if you were to write a creative brief to launch any one of his signature shoes over the years to any average ad agency or creative team, they could have come up with dozens of ideas that would have been big enough to fit just how charismatic and dominant of a player he's been. There's no doubt in my mind that the possibilities were endless, and Under Armour somehow left them all on the table. There was one launch video, I think it was Make It Old, that had the heart of an idea in it, but was so convoluted that I'm not even sure people understood it. There's never been anything near good enough, and there's never been anything that spoke to sneakerheads and hoopers in a way that mattered. There was too much politeness and softness and mediocrity in the marketing, which in this case is a darn shame. Nothing exemplifies this lack of imagination better than Paris. If you listen to previous episodes, you know I'm a big Olympic basketball fan. In the Paris games, Curry had a quiet start, didn't impact the games the way KD, LeBron, or even Booker had for most of the tournament. But when it mattered in the last 2 games, he delivered signature moments, graphic, historic images you'll never get out of your head, culminating in his famous night-night post after hitting an impossible 3 to close out Wemby and the tough French team in front of their home crowd. Nike would have had a spot ready to go if Curry was their athlete. They would have been prepared for the moment. I know this for a fact. Heck, they had one ready when the women won, but Under Armour never had anything. Just quiet after their elite athlete made history. Not only that, they should have had night-night or nuit nuit in French merch just as fast as Etsy designers had, and I looked. They had nothing. It was a marketing campaign already gift-wrapped, complete with the most magnetic personality, a great catchphrase, and a dominant imagery, and they didn't do anything with it. They missed out on that moment, and they missed out on the last decade. Unfortunately for Steph, they seemed incapable of the timely content that truly leveraged his greatness. So what now? I'm sure Under Armour will downsize and make their operations more efficient. They'll create value for their shareholders and focus on their core business. They may even turn things around. That would pale in comparison to what would have been, mind you. They'll be fine. I'm not sure anyone will ever buy their basketball shoes, but they'll be fine on some level. And Curry himself may eventually have his brand focus more on golf when he retires, since the Curry brand already has some cachet there. And given his skill on the courses and legitimate star power, that will do well for him. But there's still time to create a campaign that could make Curry and the Curry brand matter, because Steph still matters. But the clock is ticking, and fittingly for the league's best deep shooter ever, it's now a long shot. All right, that's all for Nice J for today. Hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the Curry and Under Armour contract stuff. A little bit insider baseball, maybe a little bit of a tangent, but it got me thinking, got me researching, and I wanted to pull it all together for you. All right, I hope you enjoyed it. Come back next time. And remember, shoot or shoot.